everyone, welcome to the High Wycombe Paranormal Meet. It's good to see so many of you here. And so we'd like to welcome our emergency stand-in speaker tonight due to the illness of a previous speaker who couldn't make it. So he's well known to many of us because he's always come here either to see other talks or actually do talks himself. So he's going to be talking on, well, it's Ben Emlyn-Jones of course, you need no introduction. He's going to be talking on exopolitics, the path to disclosure. So we're going to talk for about an hour and then we'll take a break and then we'll do another maybe 40 minutes or whatever and then we'll do questions and answers. So big round of applause for Ben Emlyn-Jones, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I hope you can all hear me at the back. Can you hear me all right? Yeah, great. Thanks all of you for coming. It's really, really great to be here. Oh dear. Is there any emergency speaker that can stand in for me? I don't feel well. But I do understand that this is a special day in history because today is Ken Dodd's funeral. And, well, I'd just like to say rest in peace, Ken Dodd. I'm very sorry that he's gone, a great comedian. Whether we'll see him again, I don't know. He said he didn't like the idea of reincarnation because he couldn't stand the thought of coming back as a can of milk. God rest his soul. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Welcome, all of you, and thank you for coming here. This is me, Ben Emlyn-Jones, and this here is my website, Hospital Porters Against the New World Order, HPANWO. I usually pronounce it Hapanwo. If you go there, there's an awful lot of material which you can find out about me. And I do live shows like these as well. So today, I'm going to talk about a very interesting subject, exopolitics, the path to disclosure. But first of all, a few words about me and a bit about my background. That's me, the portering Buddha. Well, that was me. I was a hospital porter for 23 years. Then I lost my job. I was kicked out of the NHS, just summarily discharged in what I think are very suspicious circumstances. I'm one of many people now who have actually been in this position where they have lost their employment because of their interest in the kind of subjects that I'm interested in. And that's a big topic. I don't have time to go into details, but it's quite telling, I think, about the world we're living in, definitely. Now, we're talking UFOs, of course, and exopolitics, but what is exopolitics and what does it mean? Now, the first thing to do, I think, is to go into the meaning of the word ufology. Now, ufology, of course, I've got it. I don't need these now because I've got that. I can actually see the screen in this one. I had some notes there because I was at Probe. Now, ufology, of course, is the study of UFOs. It says here, ufology is loosely defined as the study of reports, visual records, physical evidence, and other phenomena related to unidentified flying objects. UFOs have been subject to various investigations over the years by governments, independent groups, and scientists. And the term derives from UFO, pronounced as an acronym, ufology. Now, an awful lot has been talked about in terms of the history of ufology, where it began from its roots in the mid-1940s to the present day. Now, exopolitics is something different. Now, you often hear the word exopolitics these days. Exopolitics is often thought of as a type almost synonymous with ufology, but it's not. Now, some people describe it as being another kind of ufology. In fact, Nick Pope, God bless him, Nick Pope. Where would it be without Nick Pope? He came along to the 2011 Leeds Exopolitics Expo, and he brought with him some reporters from The Sun because he used to have a column in that, a bastion of British quality journalism. And he did a little article, he did a little report in The Sun on the conference, and he described exopolitics as the militant wing of ufology. And yeah, you could just imagine, can't you, all the coffins piled up outside the churchyards, all the overflowing dustbins all over Leeds while we were there. It was terrible. But it's true. There is an overlap between exopolitics and UFOs and ufology, but the two are not synonymous. The definition of exopolitics, and I must say that ufology is actually quite a much older term. Now, the word UFO didn't appear until the Condon report in the 1950s. Before then, they were just called flying saucers from when the term first emerged in the mid-1940s. Exopolitics was a word actually coined by Alfred Weber in 1995, actually pronounced, so it's much more recent. And this is a good definition here from Michael Salla. Michael Salla is an Australian exopolitician. Exopolitics is the study of the key individuals, political institutions and processes associated with extraterrestrial life. Information concerning extraterrestrial life and technology is kept secret from the general public, elected political representatives and even senior military officials. The supporting evidence is overwhelming. The decision making is restricted on a strict need-to-know basis. Now both exopolitics and ufology are words from ancient Greek. And exo, it means basically something outside or external. So it's politics from what's outside, which of course refers to UFOs. But of course, they're not synonyms. They obviously mean something different. One is the scientific study of the UFO phenomenon. And exopolitics is, well, you could define it, I think, as simply ufologists who've made up their minds. While the classic ufologists are still going around reading reports, looking into sightings, things like that, which is a very worthwhile cause. It's very necessary. The exopolitician has accepted that some UFO reports refer to extraterrestrial intelligence as interacting with the human race, and that needs to be dealt with, and that is basically what their mission is now, to proceed from that premise that some UFOs are extraterrestrial and how we are going to address that. But there is, of course, crossover. There is a lot of overlap. Some exopoliticians are ufologists, some ufologists are exopoliticians. However, there are those that specialise. I think pretty much there are those who specialise in one form or another. For example, that there is a ufologist. That's an exopolitician. That's a ufologist. That's an exopolitician. That's a ufologist. That's an exopolitician. And that is something, I've got no idea what that creature is. I'm terribly sorry. Funny thing about Nick Pope, he got married a couple of years ago. He was standing in front of the altar with his wife to be Elizabeth. And the vicar said to him, "Nicholas, do you take this woman Elizabeth to be your lawful wedded wife, to love and to cherish, having her hold this day, for till death do you part?" And he replied, "I can neither confirm nor deny that." That's him. So yeah, and that's old Nick Pope, who describes exopolitics as the militant wing of ufology. Now, where did exopolitics start? Because the term only goes back to 1995, so it's much newer than ufology. Well, it is newer than ufology, but it dates back from before 1995. Finding an actual start to exopolitics is actually not easy, because exopolitical ideas can be found throughout the history of ufology. However, they really begin, I think, in a particular time in the early 1970s. Now, ufology and exopolitics today are both centred on the United States of America, and they, for whatever reason, that country the subject has gravitated towards that country. But of course, there are both ufologists and exopolitics in most countries in the world, including Great Britain. However, for the real beginnings of exopolitics, the real breakthroughs and at the time when it really became organised, you had to go to a very different country. And it's quite surprising when you think about it. Now just have a look at that picture. That's lovely, isn't it? Now beautiful, I mean, I just look at that picture and I want to get my shoes off and walk in that sand, lie on those sun loungers, roll my trouser legs up and go and wade in that sea. I really do. It's a beautiful place. Now that is actually Grenada. And Grenada is a little island. It's a small island in the Caribbean, part of the Grenadine chain. And it's a very popular holiday destination. You may well have been there on a holiday. If you've been on a cruise through the Caribbean, you may well have stopped here. There's the main city, the main town, Georgetown, there's a cruise ship moored there almost every day. And like much of the Caribbean, it's famous for its fine weather, its friendly people, its easygoing lifestyle, good food, things like that. It's a perfect place to go on holiday. But there's nothing actually in this picture which suggests a very interesting fact that this place is a very important location in the history of exopolitics and ufology. It actually represents a centre. For a while it was an absolute centre of exopolitics within the world. Very interesting. Talk about something hidden, isn't it? It's hidden in plain sight. How many of you recognise this man? Anybody? Oh, Neil does, yeah. It's not Eddie Murphy. I know it looks like him, but it's not. But this is actually Sir Eric Gairy, who was the first Prime Minister of Grenada, when Grenada became an independent country in February 1974. This is just 1 month actually after the famous Bedouin Mountains UFO incident. I don't know, I'm sure there's not a connection there, I just thought that's a bit of ufological trivia. Now, he's got a sort of enigmatic smile, hasn't he? You've heard about enigmatic smiles from the Mona Lisa and things like that. And he's one of them, I think, who has this enigmatic smile. Now, he was born in 1922 on Grenada, and very quickly became politically active as an adult, and became part of the movement to make Grenada an independent country. Grenada at that part was a British Crown colony at that time, was a British Crown colony, it had been since 1877, when it was bought by the British Empire from the French Empire. In those days you could buy and sell islands. I think it cost them £5 million. I don't know what that would be in today's money. But ever since, there's always been a sense that the island should be independent. Like many other parts of the British Empire, there was a campaign for it to be independent. So he was like the Grenadian Gandhi. He worked his way up through the colonial government, applying for various positions and elections, and eventually, when the country was finally granted independence, in February 1974, he was elected as the country's first Prime Minister. And along with being a Prime Minister, he also was the United Nations ambassador, because Grenada was offered a seat on the United Nations when it became an independent state. And this man was very, very keen on the United Nations. He spent a lot of time there. And a lot of what he did at the United Nations was related to UFOs, believe it or not. This man believed in UFOs. He was very, very keen on the idea, and he wanted humanity to get to grips with that. Now, this photograph is a very, very important historical document. Now, you have here on the left Sir Eric Gairy, and he's sitting next to 3 ufologists at a table at the UN. You can see the United Nations logo there. Do you see above him there? Now, to his immediate left is J. Allen Hynek, very famous ufologist, one of the greatest ufologists in the world. And there you see Jacques Vallée, another one. Both these men were worked closely together and have very, very interesting insights. And there's Colonel Larry Coyne, another famous ufologist. Sir Eric Gairy went to the United Nations with a proposal that UFOs be recognised as a serious political issue, and he achieved that goal. It's incredible. It's an incredible thing. I'll explain how that was done. Now, this is some of the text that you'll find. If you go to the Grenada government portal, this is a transcript of Sir Eric Gairy's speech to the United Nations, which he did in October of 1978. And it talks. There's some amazing text here, considering that this is a head of state. This is a head of state, head of government of a major, a completely independent sovereign state on the United Nations. This was a speech he delivered to the United Nations General Assembly on that date, 12th of October 1978. Here we go. No, we're not just restricted to 1 or 2 parts of our planet. Reports come from all over the world today and strongly suggest not only that a growing number of people believe that UFOs exist as a physical phenomena. I can't read all this, but basically you can find this text at the Grenada government portal. It's very, very easy to find. And he talks here about the seriousness of the subject of UFOs and about how they should be regarded as a serious phenomenon by scientists and as a political issue. Really, really incredible thing to do. So it's not October 1977, not 78. That's right. He did several speeches over time. Very, very interesting thing indeed. Now, in 1977, Sir Eric also instructed the Post Office of Grenada to issue these special stamps. This is a stamp here worth $2 Grenadian. Do any of you collect stamps? You got one of these? It's a very rare one. But this is really, really quite a remarkable stamp indeed. I'd love to get a letter with one of these stuck to it. And that
I've got some stamps, Ben. I'll have a look.
Oh yeah, please do. See if you've got one of these. Oh, thanks. There's Sir Eric himself. And there he sees the United Nations building in New York City, which is where he spent a lot of his time. And if you look at the top left, you see a little UFO there. That's great, a little flying saucer. Now, that actually might well have been based on a real UFO sighting that took place in May of 1973. Now, and the witness to that particular UFO sighting at that location was none other than the Beatle, John Lennon. It's not a photo, no. No, this is just a picture that was done as promotion for the stamp. But you see the UFO there? And it says here, research into UFOs above the stamp. John Lennon saw a UFO sailing along the River Hudson outside his apartment in New York, and it went towards the United Nations building in May of 1973, just a few years before Gary made his famous speech. And I wouldn't be surprised if Gary was actually aware of that. So you see, so this is an amazing stamp. Now, that's not all. I mean, the funny thing is, like, for a man in his position to talk about this subject is something amazing. And what's also amazing, maybe this is partly to do with the Caribbean culture, the fact that the Caribbean does tend to throw up these rather eccentric and maverick people like Bob Marley, for example. There's many, many others. But his interest in UFOs does not seem to have affected his popularity in political terms. You may wonder what the population, the electorate, actually thought about their Prime Minister spending taxpayers' money on little green men and flying saucers. It turns out they weren't all that bothered. Unfortunately, other more earthly matters soon would affect his popularity, but I'll come to that in a minute. Yeah, I mean, you can't imagine, you can never possibly imagine that happening now, can you? In this country. Imagine if if what's her name, the Wicked Witch of the West, old Theresa May, suddenly announced she was like going to spend some of the shekel on UFO research. Oh, well, I'd be delighted personally, but I think not many people would be. Gary was not affected politically by this at all by his own people. They supported him in what he was doing. Maybe they understood what he understood. Now, what's a reason more amazing? Have any of you been to the International UFO Congress? All right, it's been held every year since 1990 in Nevada and Arizona, USA. But it was actually reconvened after a break because there was an original International UFO Congress that began in 1977. And Sir Eric Gary spoke on stage at that Congress. It was at Acapulco, Mexico. He was at the first ever International UFO Congress, and he was one of the speakers. Again, this is remarkable. This is the first time ever that a serving head of government has actually spoken on stage at a UFO conference. Again, just imagine someone like Theresa May speaking at an event like this, or a Probe where I was at the weekend. It's unthinkable. You can't believe it would happen, but it did. And there's been several others, along with Sir Paul Hellyer, MP, who I'll be talking about later. It's really remarkable that people who achieve this high state of political office are willing to talk about these things seriously, and also to engage in the various conferences that most people find crazy. But he took it seriously, he believed in it. Now this Sir Eric and what he was up to is not the first, it's not the only time, I don't know if it's the first time, it's not the only time that the United Nations and its activities have rubbed up against the UFO phenomenon. This image here, this double image here, refers to another event that happened in 1980. This is a few years after Sir Eric's speech. Now, at the time Sir Eric Gary addressed the United Nations, the Secretary General of the United Nations was an Austrian man called Kurt Waldheim. He left office and was replaced by this man here you see on the left-hand pane. That is Javier Pérez de Cuellar. Now, in 1980, he had just finished his stint at the United Nations when something very interesting happened. On the right, you see a picture of a woman there. That is a young lady in New York who lived in New York in an apartment building very close to the United Nations headquarters in Manhattan, New York, called Linda Napolitano. Now, Linda Napolitano was abducted by extraterrestrials from her bed. And you see here, she's rising in a beam of light towards a spacecraft, towards a flying saucer, and there's some aliens around her. She's wearing her nightie. You see, she's wearing her nightie there, and she's being lifted up. She's levitating. She was lifted out of her bed, and they levitated her through a window, a closed window, incidentally, through the glass, and up into the air. She was like on the 5th or 6th floor, so it was a bit precarious, and up into the spacecraft. Now, very unusually for an alien abduction, there were actually witnesses to this one. Independent witnesses actually came forward and said that they had seen this happening. They had seen Linda Napolitano hanging in the air outside her window. They were passing her apartment building at the time, and they saw her hanging around outside the window. I can't remember if they were in a car or on a train. But it turns out that these guys, these people, were assistants of the United Nations Secretary General, Javier Perez de Cuellar, or just former. At the time, he was only just become the former UN Secretary General. And it's not known whether Javier Perez de Cuellar was actually in their company at the time. Now, as far as I know, this man has never made any comment about this particular event, this alien abduction that was witnessed. But there were several people who knew him and worked closely with him, came forward and confirmed that they'd seen it happen. I'd love to be able to know whether he can confirm or deny that he was there. To have the UN Secretary General actually witness something like it is quite remarkable. Is everyone warm enough? Good. Yeah, I've got there's a reason why I'm wearing. There's a reason why I've got a short sleeve shirt on actually, and I'll tell you more about that later. I'll show you why I'm wearing a short sleeve shirt. There's a reason for it, but I'm not too cold. It's all right. Now you may have heard about this. This is actually Ronald Reagan speaking at the UN General Assembly, September the 21st, 1987. And he made a speech about extraterrestrial life and threats from beyond our world. He did this twice. He did this a year before in 1986 as well. Now this is a guy, this is a very interesting chap. This man was the US president through much of the 1980s, during the time when the Cold War was winding down. It was in its terminal thaw. This eventually culminated with along with Mikhail Gorbachev, who was his opposite number in the Soviet Union. This culminated with the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union and the post-Soviet Russia. But he said something very interesting at two speeches. He said, I'm paraphrasing now, he said, I wonder how quickly our differences would become irrelevant if we, as the people of Earth, were faced from a threat beyond our planet. In other words, that it would unite, in a sense, it would unite us and stop us thinking about our own differences on this planet. We understand our common humanity. That's the point he was making. And then he said, well, he added a little bit more at the end. Is not an extraterrestrial threat already among us? And I expect people wondered what he was going to say next. He said, what could be more otherworldly than the war and the threat of war? And I don't know whether he was going to... He quickly changed his script there at that time, I'm not sure. Very interesting chap. Apparently he knew Steven Spielberg. And according to somebody close to Spielberg, they used to have conversations about UFOs. And Reagan said, you know, Steve, that film you made, Close Encounters, you wouldn't believe how real it was. And here is Sir Eric Gehry with the US President Jimmy Carter. Now, these two guys, opposite numbers, the President of the United States before Reagan, they had a lot in common. I'm sure they had some very interesting conversations because Jimmy Carter believes in UFOs. He's still alive, Carter, he's in his 90s, but he's still willing to talk about his own UFO sighting that happened before he was president. When he was in the 1960s, before he became US president, he was staying at the home of his friend, the actress Shirley MacLaine. And both of them had a sighting of a UFO, and he describes it in detail. It's very, very interesting indeed. So I'm sure there must have been some rapport between these two men, no doubt about it. Well, here we are. Now, if you go to the UN website and you just look up this number, you will find this. It's there. It's in black and white square. This is absolutely a remarkable document. It really is. UN Secretary General Assembly Decision 33/426, 18th of December 1978. And when you read these words, you can hardly believe that this is coming from the official United Nations. The establishment of an agency or a department of the United Nations for undertaking, coordinating and disseminating the results of research into unidentified flying objects and related phenomena. At the 87th plenary meeting, 18th December 1978, the General Assembly, on the recommendation for a special political committee, adopted the following text as representative consensus of the members of the Assembly. So here we go. The resolution submitted by Grenada at the 32nd and 33rd sessions of the General Assembly regarding unidentified flying objects. It actually says it. It actually says it. This is how far this became known as the Gehry Initiative, and it was successful. It managed to get this resolution on UFOs passed. Here's the rest of the text, and it gives several details here about the nature of this particular political committee, and how it worked. This was amazing. This could well have been the first step to disclosure, with a capital D. The Gehry Initiative set the ball rolling which could have led to, well, it essentially said in as many words, UFOs are real, what are we going to do about it? It said these are most certainly real phenomena and they have to be taken seriously. Very, very different to how modern politicians speak. This was not long ago, this is 1978, not that long ago. But it all went wrong. It all went terribly, terribly wrong. This man is Maurice Bishop. Now, Gary, this happened on the 15th of March. The Ides of March, as William Shakespeare would say. Gary was he was at the United Nations having another consultation with Valheim when he received devastating news from home. Maurice Bishop had taken power in a coup. Maurice Bishop was Sir Eric Gary's principal political rival on Grenada. He led the opposition, the principal opposition in the Grenada Parliament, which is called the New Dual Movement. Dual is actually an acronym. It stands for Joint Endeavour for Workers' Education and Liberation. Now, this was a Marxist-Leninist group that was operating out of, it's basically run by Cuba and subsequently the Soviet Union. It was a product of what you often find with the Caribbean. You get a lot of extremes, you get lots of new ideas, and the Cold War was very much played out in proxy within the Caribbean. And so what happened was there was an intense hatred between these two men. Sir Eric and Maurice Bishop hated each other. And what happened, Maurice took advantage of Gary's absence. He also, well, firstly, he tried to smear Gary in all kinds of different ways. And Gary's interest in UFOs was, of course, one of the things that was used by all his political rivals to make him look like some kind of nutter. They say, you don't want some kind of loony running your country. He's not fit to rule. He believes in little green men and flying saucers. But on the 15th of March 1979, this man took power. He and the rest of the New Dual movement, including his friend and colleague Bernard Cord, seized weapons that they'd smuggled into Grenada in oil barrels, and they walked into the Grenada government buildings and they said, we're taking over. Their first move, what happened was Bishop immediately appointed himself Prime Minister of Grenada and Bernard Cord his Deputy Prime Minister, and they immediately arrested all the members of Gary's party and either exiled them or locked them up in prison camps. Sir Eric himself was exiled. He couldn't return to his own country. He wouldn't have been allowed in. Sir Eric was forced to stay in New York. He was basically granted political asylum by the United States, and he had to stay there. And it wasn't an easy asylum either, because Sir Eric had to watch his back the whole time, because the New Dual movement had allies in the United States. There was one guy in particular called Mario Salas. He was no relation to Captain Bob. But Mario Salas ran a group that was affiliated to the New Dual movement, and he said that he would hunt down Gary and kill him. So Gary had to walk around with bodyguards the whole time. He had to carry a gun himself, because he didn't know when some bullet would come his way. So that was the situation, unfortunately. Now, what this meant was that Sir Eric immediately had to drop everything he was doing related to UFOs and sort out this problem in his own country, which took the best part of 5 years. Now, for the people of Grenada, I mean, Maurice Bishop actually was considered a very popular leader in Grenada. He was the airport at Grenada is today named after him. It was very, very much considered a golden age. However, this had a lot to do with the fact that Grenada was basically being bankrolled by the Soviet Union, because along with Cuba, they now had a second ally in the Caribbean. As I said, the Caribbean was a place where pretty much the Cold War was played out in proxy. The forces of Soviet socialism, Marxism, Leninism were set against the forces of capitalist democracy, Western economic capitalism, things like that. And so, as with the rest of the world, the Cold War was played out in small. So, up till then, you see that the Soviets only had one country, only one ally in that region. It was Cuba. Now they had a second ally, Grenada. And so Grenada was basically given a blank check to do with whatever they liked. So the people there were suddenly, everybody on Grenada, Grenada's got a very small population, only a few thousand people. They suddenly became very, very rich, and they could do things like they never had to do before. They had the chance to travel to the Soviet Union and go to university and things like that. So it was all very nice for those people for a while. I mean, whether it lasted, I don't know. But Sir Eric was desperately trying to sort this out. Now, what happened in the end was that there was another coup in Grenada in 1983. Now, what happened was, I mentioned that he had a friend called Bernard Cord. Bernard Cord was the Deputy Prime Minister of Grenada. Now, Cord essentially started running a separate cabal within the New Dual movement, which then took power in a coup and deposed Maurice Bishop. So Bernard Cord, Bishop's friend, and Deputy Prime Minister seized weapons, walked into the government building, announced they were taking over, and deposed the Maurice Bishop regime. Now, what they did was it was much more brutal than the first coup. They took Bishop and all his allies within the New Dual movement, dragged them out into the streets and shot them. They were called the Grenada 17. They were all killed by Bernard Cord, friend of Maurice Bishop. As the saying goes, who needs enemies? Now, after that, Bernard Cord appointed himself Prime Minister of Grenada and introduced a new regime of his own making. And at this point, the United Nations chose to intervene, and they did. They invaded Grenada in May of 1983, and they deposed Bernard Cord. Troops landed on the island. There was a firefight, and Bernard Cord was killed. So the Americans killed Bernard Cord. Luckily, it was very, very different to the occupation of Iraq. It was a lot shorter, and there was much less bloodshed. It went a lot more smoothly. And the American troops actually departed the island within 6 months. And what happened was, once the Cord regime was crushed, they reintroduced the original constitution that Eric Gairy had actually put into place in February 1974. And finally, Sir Eric Gairy was able to return to his homeland. But that took a whole lot of time. You see, by the time that had been sorted out, the impetus was lost. Now, I suppose the question would then be raised, I'm sure if you're looking at disclosure and looking about the truth embargo, is there a connection between the Gairy initiative and the Bishop coup? Was it somehow staged in order to prevent Sir Eric from having his way in terms of his work on UFOs? Which, if this hadn't happened, would have gone a lot further. Gairy would have continued pushing for more and more disclosure. I've not seen any evidence to suggest that. I mean, as far as I can see, there's many, many reasons why the Bishop coup happened that seem to be completely internal to the politics of that little island and the world at large and the Cold War. There's no evidence to suggest that this was some kind of contrived event to scupper the Gairy initiative for the sake of keeping the truth embargo on UFOs. It was just bad luck, or good luck, if you're one of the keepers of that secret. If you're keeping the secret of UFOs and this happens, you may not have created this situation, but you were probably thinking, oh, thank goodness for that. Aren't we lucky? So yes, so that's, I think, is the truth behind this particular issue. However, there's a little bit more to add to this story. This is very interesting. This appeared on the BBC Caribbean website. It was actually an article from 2010. And it's very interesting because it talks about how it says UN foiled Gairy on UFOs. And it consists of a series of telexes that were sent in. Some evidence came to light, declassified telexes between the US Foreign Office, with the UK Foreign Office, the British Foreign Office, and the UK United Nations mission. In other words, the UK ambassador to the United Nations. Now, if anyone younger than me is probably thinking, what's a telex? I've never heard of one of those before. Well, can you imagine an email on a shopping till roll? Got it, kids? That's a telex. So these telexes went back and forth. Now, they make interesting reading, but there's no direct call for a cover-up on UFOs regarding UFOs as real things. That's not spelled out in the actual content of the telexes. It's more a case that the Foreign Office and the UK government were actually concerned that, in a sense, this the issue of UFOs was going to discredit the United Nations and its role. They were basically worried this kind of tomfoolery would make the UN a bit of a laughing stock, and that Sir Eric Gairy was regarded as a bit of a liability in that sense. He was regarded as a bit of a clown who really shouldn't be allowed to get away with what he was doing. So the Foreign Office instructed the UK ambassador to do everything he could to stop the Gairy initiative. Now again, there's nothing explicit in those telexes that actually spells out a cover-up of the UFO phenomenon. It just says the UFOs don't exist and they're all crazy, so we really don't want the United Nations talking about it even, because it just makes them look crazy. However, again, if you are the keepers of the truth embargo, it serves a purpose, doesn't it? It serves the purpose without you explicitly stating the purpose. So no doubt they would encourage this. It's not provable, but it is a possibility, it is a distinct possibility. And then we have Sir Eric Gairy addressing the UN on the 12th of October 1978. He made several speeches to the United Nations on the subject of UFOs. Sir Eric returned to his home island of Grenada after a 5-year exile. And he did run for political office again. I think he wanted to be Prime Minister again. But he seemed to have lost his allure with the people. He was not as popular as a politician after the deposing of the coup, of the Cord regime, as he was beforehand. And I think he was tired, he was a bit lackluster, and he never again achieved high political office. He died peacefully at his home on Grenada in 1997. And if you're ever on a holiday in Grenada, if you're ever sunning yourself on that beautiful beach, lying on those sun lounges, having a coconut shell of Malibu, or you're ever swimming in that beautiful blue sea I showed you at the beginning of this section, you might take a little moment out of your holiday to nip to the florists and buy a bunch of chrysanthemums and lay them on the tomb of Sir Eric Gairy in Georgetown and pay homage to this, the first ever true exopolitician. How long have I been going for now?
It's a little bit late, so it's 20:47. We started about 40 minutes ago, something like that.
Okay, shall I take a break now? Is now a good time? It's probably a good time because it's it's like a break in the.
Okay, we'll take a break of 20 minutes, and we can get drinks, use the loo, cigarettes, anything like that, and resume in 20 minutes. Round of applause for Ben.
Thank you. Thank you very much.